Got a little bop with that one. Sir.
Too cool to be
Well,
careless.
I like that. I like that. Listen, man, you guys should have heard this one off the air. You know, that had a few different classics mixed in there. Love that. You know, it's nice to be working with a DJ. You know, who's got some understanding of some music history. So it makes things more fun. Talk some ball, talk some music. You know, so great to be joining you guys again. This is Kyrie Demos. At Riri_Demos on Twitter, Instagram, as well as TikTok. Welcome back to Down the Line Football. I'm joined once again by my guy Matt Batanti from Football Guys, O-line specialist over there. And yeah, you know, we're keeping the train rolling. You know, I know it's the preseason is winding down. You know, we've got a few more games to watch before we get to the regular season. We'll have a little lull after this weekend between training camp and start of the regular season. So really excited to see how the summer winds down from here. How are things going with you, Matt?
It's real good over here in Philadelphia. I know it's fantasy football season. Everyone's drafting this weekend. Friday, Saturday night drafts, very happening. Next couple weeks, you're going to be making these decisions. What running back do I want? What wide receiver do I want? And I like to say the offensive line is the tiebreaker in those situations. So tonight, we're going to talk about the NFC East offensive lines. We got 4 teams to talk about: the Philadelphia Eagles, the Dallas Cowboys, so-called America's team. We'll get into that. And, of course, the New York Giants and the Washington Commanders. Kyrie, any thoughts about the NFC East before we get into the teams?
Yeah, for sure. So, it's interesting. So, we're going to be going off of Matt's, ranking system as far as, when it comes to these O-line. So, we've got a little bit of everything here. We've got one of the most elite offensive line groups in the league in Philly. One of the more middle tier groups with the Dallas Cowboys, and then rounding up the rear with the New York Giants and Washington Commanders. So, so we're gonna just break it down from the top down, like I said. So, as far as I can share my screen. So, so if you can see here, we're going to start from the top down. Like I said, Philadelphia here is second ranked, only one of 2 offensive line units, according to Max rankings here, to receiving a plus, followed up by Dallas Cowboys at 16, and all the way down to the bottom here with Washington, New York Giants and then Washington, both getting C grades. So, so let's kick things off with Philly. Obviously, Philly has really invested in its offensive line. I mean, almost I want to say historically, but I would say really in the last decade or so, it feels like they've really made sure that offensive line is where it starts and ends for that offensive unit. Even dating back to the 2017 season where they were able to capture Super Bowl 53, with whether it was Jason Kelsey and Lane Johnson and some of those guys. Obviously, the first name I mentioned there, decided to hang it up this offseason, and is going into the booth, getting himself rested before he ends up in football heaven in Canton with Jason Kelsey there. But we've got a really deep group overall in Philly. Some guys who have played, some guys who have made the moves over, in the switch and just to shuffle things over a little bit. But all in all, still, a high level unit. And there's a lot of different factors that are in play. I'm a huge fan of Lane Johnson at right tackle. Definitely one of the best right tackles in the game. Ty over at left tackle as well. I mean, he's, it's crazy to think he was, or I'm sorry, not Vitae, um, Mailata. Mailata, he's a guy that I know initially came in as a project and they really weren't sure. They had him work guard and things like that. He's truly become one of the best in the game, and that was following in the footsteps of Jason Peters, being able to learn opposite a guy like Lane Johnson as well. So just Matt, as far as the Eagles offensive line, just what is it about this group overall that warranted them to be the number 2 ranked offensive line unit?
Well, I mean, it starts with coaching. Jeff Stoutland's an outstanding former coach out of Alabama, and he, ever since he arrived with the Eagles, he's really taken this program to the next level. You mentioned all the good players that are in the lineup. Kelsey retired, which is a step back. That's probably why they're at number 2 instead of at number 1. It's impossible to replace a Hall of Fame player like this. And, it's unfair to ask Cam Jurgens to do that. But I think, you're looking at this lineup, they're a big group, like physically huge. Mailata's 380, 375. Landon Dickerson, left guard, is another huge body, above 360. You've got the new right guard, Mekhi Becton from the New York Jets, checking in at 380 plus, 360, 400. Who knows what it is on a day-to-day basis? It could be anything. But, I mean, they are looking to bring the run right down to the other team, right to the point of attack, and they don't care. They don't care if it's coming, and they are willing to sacrifice a little bit of pass protection, knowing that they have a mobile quarterback in Jalen Hurts. So that plays into some of these decisions to go for guys that are closer to 400 than 300 pounds. But they're really loaded for bear. And I came prepared with some goodies, a little bit of film breakdown of the new right guard, Mekhi Becton. Do you have anything to add before I just jump into that?
Yeah, for sure. I think it, one thing that's really important about this group is, we talk about it. We talked about it last week, right? As far as like blue chip guys versus guys who have been starters and things like that. They've got several blue chip starters, Mailata, Landon Dickerson, Lane Johnson. Those are 3 of the best guys in the league at their respective positions, first and foremost. So, it really starts and ends with those guys. I think, yes, it'll be so tough trying to fill the shoes of Jason Kelsey. Like you said, man, I don't think it's necessarily possible, but it's great to see that the Eagles' succession plan is now able to come into effect because they drafted Cam Jurgens with the intention of, hey, we're going to have him play next to Jason. He's going to learn next to Jason. He's going to be right in his hip pocket. Once Jason rides off into the sunset, we'll slide Cam over to center. And being able to do that also goes along with bringing in a guy like Mekhi Becton, who all the talent in the world, Matt can speak to it as a Jets fan, all the talent that Mekhi Becton possesses, but it's some of those things, whether it's, being as locked in as he needs to be versus not. It's, the weight issues, things like that. Some of those things that may seem like the small things because he does check the boxes as far as the big things. He's got the size, the frame, nastiness out there when he plays, but it's about putting it all together. So I'll let Matt, take us through here with these clips of Mekhi Becton and just some of the good and some of the bad that may come with his play out there.
Yeah, I mean, he's unique. You talk about RAS scores and such, to be that weight, 360, 370, to run a 5'1" is super rare. It's almost like Shaquille O'Neal type rarity. So he deserved his draft slot when it happened. I understand why they did it. Obviously, with hindsight, you take Tristan Wirfs. With hindsight, you take Penei Sewell over Zach Wilson. But the draft is not done in hindsight, my friends. But here we are in Philadelphia, and we're looking at number 77, Mekhi Becton, who is, he's looks like he's calling the blocking calls. He's the only so-called first teamer in this action against the Ravens. That was a good set from him. This is what I would consider a not so good set from him. He doesn't pick up this. He doesn't have the awareness to pick up that sort of twist that you see them execute. But I thought it was very interesting that they put him out there with a team first, second teamers and had him call the blocking and tap the center when it was time to snap. And those are Raven starters. Those are not bums that he's going against. And this is an example of, you're asking me why it didn't work out for him, this sort of lack of awareness that we're seeing there. He definitely has all the skills in the world to make that block. And I showed pass protection sets because as a run blocker, he's amazing. I can show you him dominating the run game, and that's what he does great. And I'm selling him short, showing past stuff, but I wanted to highlight the weaknesses in his game. But it looks like the Eagles are going to give him this job, and Tyler Steen will be lurking in the bench, but I think they want to go with as big as possible. I mean, that tush push isn't out of the lineup, and brotherly shove, or whatever they call it, and the more load you can put up in front, the sort of more unstoppable that thing becomes. And the league is not making it illegal because they're basically the only team that can do it with the effectiveness as the Eagles is the Eagles. So it is what it is. So I think that they're gonna you ride up those backs of the Landon Dickersons and the Mekhi Bectons, and we'll see how it goes. But what did you see in that clip there, Carrie?
I really do believe that Mekhi Becton, I was a huge fan of him coming out of Louisville. I thought he was a plug and play starter. And personally, I did think he was a left tackle, but especially like you mentioned with some of those athletic, traits that he possesses. However, there comes a lot of pressure with playing offensive tackle. I think, being that guy out on the island, taking on the Hassan Reddicks of the world, the Khalil Macks of the world, the TJ Watts of the world, right? Being matched up against those types of guys every single play, right? You're if you're not bringing your best stuff, you're going to get exposed. And, there were times in New York where he did, show that, hey, when he's on, he's one of the best linemen in football. But when he's off, it can be a train wreck out there. So I think it just goes to show that, his level of consistency is going to be so important for this team's success. And, I also think that moving him to guard was such a smart move, right? Again, not on that island anymore, being able to move inside, being able to have a dominant right tackle next to him now in Lane Johnson. We'll see what happens with Cam Jurgens, taking over for Jason Kelce at center. And we're not saying he needs to be Jason Kelce. If he does his job, that'll make Mekhi Becton's life that much easier. I will say as well, just considering this group, that it's very, very much strong at the top. What are your thoughts on some of those depth pieces, and what are some names that we should be looking out for as far as guys who may need to step in later on down the line?
You mean as Eagles depth?
Yes.
So, I mean, I have to plug. This is not the question you asked, but I think if you're looking at fantasy drafts and you're wondering, should I take Saquon Barkley or not? I think it's very interesting to think about what Saquon Barkley could do behind this sort of O-line that's running heavy. And they don't give those jobs out freely. So that's why I can't have dodged the depth question. They did draft a couple guys, and they might develop them over time, but basically these guys are the top three guys are locked in, and their only really competition is at that guard spot, and Tyler Steen is kind of the other guy in there. So I mean, we talk about the Eagles at 2 overall. This is how you get to 2 overall. You invest in the team year after year. You find guys that are former first-round picks off the scrap heap, and you coach them up. And you take chances when other teams can't take chances because you have solid guys next to him. As you said, as you pointed out, Lane Johnson helping out Becton. That's perfect, So we'll see how it goes. But I'm very interested to see the rushing attack. I think Barkley is going to feast at certain times during the season. And they didn't, pay this guy all this money not to give him the production. So that's my sort of tip for people looking for fantasy draft information on the weekend.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, I think I honestly I don't understand. I get some of the injury issues. He's a veteran back and stuff like that. But to me, I just don't understand how Saquon's ADP isn't higher than it is. It just makes no sense to me. I've always one fantasy football nugget I'll drop is one thing I always prioritize is I seek out players that are in good offenses. I don't care, if there's a committee. I don't care if, there's a bunch of different guys that they're going to spread the ball out to. Like, I'd rather take guys from offenses that I know are going to score points because at the end of the day, yeah, you can accumulate a lot of yardage, but if you're not getting into the paint, that doesn't mean anything at the end of the day. So to me, like, you take a running back as talented as Saquon Barkley, the skill set he has inside and outside of the backfield, combined with the offensive line he's got, combined with the receiving core around him and Jalen Hurts, under center as well. Like, this is by far the most talented team he's ever played on. So I think the sky's the limit. But, shifting gears as far as, a team that was able to make, a great addition in their backfield behind a great offensive line. I'll be interested to see what things look like for the Dallas Cowboys this season. A year where, they lose Tyron Smith. And yes, Tyron Smith isn't the same guy that we know and love from, Dallas's heyday, leading the league in rushing with Zeke Elliott and everything like that. However, he's still a viable player and a vet. So I think losing him as far as, the performance aspect, but the leadership aspect, I think it's a big deal. But, really young group now moving forward. Terrence Steele and Zach Martin are still, entrenched as far as some vets on that right side. Zach Martin is getting up there in age. This is going to be his 11th year in the league, I believe. So as much, again, as a Hall of Famer, yes, it's great, but the play hasn't been necessarily the highest level, as far as Zach Martin's standard, right? We're talking about one of the best guys to ever do it. So, it'll be interesting to see how he can put things together here. But, I think the eyes really are going to be on that left side. You got Tyler Guyton, the first rounder out of Oklahoma at left tackle, and Tyler Smith, who the Cowboys took in the first round 2 years ago, who ended up, they tried him at left tackle, but the whole thought was, hey, if he doesn't work out at tackle, we can plug him right in at guard, put out of Tulsa. So I do think that, having another young piece next to Tyler Guyton as he's getting up to speed, as he's really developing and maturing, because he was a guy that I did really like, in this draft process. There was a ton of talent as far as the offensive linemen, but specifically tackles, and Guyton was right in the mix of that. He was a guy that I felt like had all the skills to be able to really be, a high level starter in the NFL. He was just raw. He was young. This is a guy who was a tight end at one point. You can kind of tell in his body, and he's really got an athletic build. So, as far as this Dallas unit, ranked 13th overall. So just considering this Dallas unit, what are your thoughts on it, Matt? Where they're at, and especially considering, they were right in the range of the Philly offensive line a few years ago. Now they've dropped some spots. What are your thoughts on that precipitous drop.
Okay, well, I mean, the ranks are where the ranks. I can't play favorites or bias against teams that I don't like or whatever. So when a team loses Tyron Smith and their starting center, they're going to take a hit in the rankings just from a cohesion standpoint. But that being said, I really, really like the new left tackle, Tyler Guyton. I mean, you ever watch a guy as a rookie and get excited and you think to yourself, he's going to play. He's a player. And that's the film I've been seeing on Guyton. So for whatever reason, the all 22 of the Raiders game isn't up, but I found this clip off of Twitter, and we're just gonna watch this a little from the broadcast. Tyler Guyton absolutely, well, it's not pretty, but just burying people on the Raiders, and the attitude in which he does it is notable. I think when you see a guy, you're like, that guy can play. He's gonna play. And that was pretty funny one. And then I went back to the Rams game a week earlier. Poor number 51. I don't know who he is, but he gets blocked into the nether realms. He is pushed off the screen in that rep, and then in the next rep, he is absolutely buried. And then Tyler gives him the let me get the dirt off my number sort of pose at the end. We'll watch that one more time just so that everybody can see number 51 soul leave his body at the end of this rep. Just vicious stuff. And I like to see it. I'm not going to lie. I like to see a lineman that finishes, a guy that's got some attitude. I'm way into it. So Jerry Jones gets a lot of criticism over the years, but he has a tendency to find these guys, and he understands the game of football. A lot of owners who interfere don't understand the game of football, and he does. So I think they got a player there, and I'm interested to hear your reaction. I'm bringing all these goodies. What do you think?
Yeah, no, for sure. I was, like I said, I was a big fan of Tyler Guyton coming out. And the thing too about him, like as far as like, yes, he's he's a guy that's really got to continue to develop and mature and is raw. Like he's a massive guy. He's 6'8", 328, and could probably add more weight if he wanted to, but I don't think he needs to necessarily. I think just the pure athleticism is a major piece when you're playing left tackle, but to also know that he has that nastiness, that dog in him, you know what I mean? You need that. That's something that no matter what level of football, if you're in the trenches, you have to be able to have that mentality, because if not, you're probably not necessarily finishing plays like you said, right? I think that's something, even as a coach, early in my coaching tenure now, that's one thing I try to express to guys is like, listen, man, till the whistle blows, like you got to be able to apply that pressure. And Tyler Guyton, I think it was a little bit tougher to see at times when you're playing in an offense like Oklahoma's, right? They're trying to spread it out and stuff like that. But, just seeing the massive frame, the skill, the will, I think he's a guy that, is going to be able to come in and really should have a lengthy NFL career as long as he stays healthy. Because like you said, Matt, you can't teach this stuff. Boom. Feel like John Madden up here. But, he is going down, just trying to knock somebody's block off. That's important. I always say, if you're going to make a mistake, make an aggressive mistake. Go body somebody. Go, pancake somebody, So they did get a good one with Tyler Guyton. I'm interested to see, what things look like, with Brock Hoffman now at the pivot there. They also have drafted Picker DB. So just as far as the center position, what are your thoughts on where the center position is right now for Dallas, and what they could potentially look forward to at the center spot this season?
Yeah, I did watch a Brock Hoffman and Cooper Beebe in the tape when I was looking for those pancakes. And I think Brock Hoffman is a little top heavy. I wish I had some film to show you to back that up, but he's a little bit waist bendy, a little bit top heavy, but he can move bodies in the run game. And I think that's the trade-off a lot of guys make. I think he's tough. I think Cooper Beebe's a much better athlete, but he has so much to learn. But eventually he's probably coming for that job. And if he doesn't get that job, he'll come for Zach Martin's job when the time comes, hopefully, is what the Dallas plan is. But that's a really good question. I'm glad you asked it, because that's the other sort of question mark. I mean, they knocked the left tackle thing out of the park. I don't know if they've really done the same thing with the center situation, and that bears further watching for sure.
For sure, yeah, makes a lot of sense. Makes a lot of sense. You know, I think, and it's crazy how, you know, some things kind of play out in multiple different ways. Like, I think the running game as a whole for the Cowboys should be in question. Obviously, everybody's talked about the running backs, right? Like Ezekiel Elliott, we go Dowd, right? But I think even more so, you know, those guys up front. You know, it's not the same unit that, you know, was helping Ezekiel Elliott win rushing titles. So, you know, they're in a little bit of a transition. It is important that they were able to, you know, secure that left tackle spot down. And so quickly, too, right? You lose Tyron Smith, same offseason you draft Tyler Guyton, you know, so they were able to land on their feet in that regard. But it is going to be interesting to see what happens there at center.
It's easier said than done. Teams try to do it every offseason, and it's very hard to develop that left tackle.
Yeah, 100%. Now, as we look down the list from here, we're going, you know, all the way to the Meadowlands. We're checking in with the New York Giants, and the Giants, it's almost felt like a perpetual problem ever since their 2016 playoff run with Eli Manning and Odell Beckham Jr. and Sterling Shepard and those guys. You know, the Giants have really struggled up front, and you know, and it's so tough to see that, considering, like you said, with the Cowboys, right, getting the left tackle spot taken care of. You know, you draft Andrew Thomas, and yeah, he had some issues early on, but he's truly grown into one of the best left tackles in the game. But now it's just a lot of unknown. You know, John Runyon, you know, he was able to get some action while he was playing in Green Bay, but you know, didn't end up sticking as a full-time starter there. You know, you got John Michael Schmitz Jr., as well as Greg Van Roten coming over from Las Vegas. And then, you know, as far as the right tackle spot, you know, we already know what it's been like for Evan Neal in his first couple of seasons, you know, out of Alabama. You know, a guy who, you know, many thought would become a Pro Bowl level player, and it could not have been a more worse start for him. So, you know, Jermaine Illuminor has been able to come in and you know, compete at that right tackle spot. So, just as far as the Giants with their 29th overall ranking, just thoughts on where they're at and you know, how they can you know, start to climb the ranks from here.
So yeah, I just to clarify, the reason why my numbers are a little bit different than the one we showed in the beginning is I've updated my rankings and I've yet to publish them. So these are the new numbers. They actually dropped from the beginning of the show to now. They dropped 2 points. No, but they honestly, okay, what they did was they took this offensive line coach named Carmen Brasillo or Brasillo. I'm not quite sure how you say his last name, but Carmen Brasillo comes over from Las Vegas. And they have this particular type of system that they like to run. And they bring in Greg Van Roten and Jermaine Illuminor to man the right side. So those two guys are already familiar with the system. Now, they're not like good, above average, or very good starters. They're like below average starters, but they know the system. So that's why they're there. And then they bring in John Runyon, who is from Green Bay. And I think that was a pretty savvy signing, actually. So
Mm-hmm.
I'm looking at this group, and Andrew Thomas is a former Pro Bowler. John Michael Schmitz needs to prove himself, but he's a pretty decent prospect. And 3 other guys that are all new. But once they settle in, if they stay healthy and they become cohesive, this Giants group could be more like 16 overall or 17 overall. They're not like terrible, they just have a lot of change on the coaching side as well, and the offensive system side as well, not just the personnel side. And Evan Neal is kind of a write-off at this point. If they can turn him into a swing tackle, that's like the hope for Evan Neal, if he can be salvaged a little bit. But I mean, really, they're really looking more towards getting guys that know the system and developing them along those lines. So the Giants, I'm going to show you the clip. Enough comments. I could sit here and wax poetic, but basically this is the running game of the Giants. And these are the starters, except for 64, who is Andrew Stinney, who's in for John Runyon, who's got some sort of shoulder or back issue that the coaches say it's not going to be an issue. But I mean, this is like an I formation, a little bit of motion, a little counter. This is not the same play twice. This is 2 of the same play being run with 2 different results, both of which were hugely positive. Now, what I'm not showing you is that Daniel Jones threw a pick 6 just before these 2 plays, but they threw the pick 6, and then they did the kickoff, and then they ran one of these counter draws and then another one of these counter draws, and that's what it's supposed to look like. I put it back here because I think this is a good example of what this Giants offense is trying to do. Old school, double teams, duo blocking, they call it. Let the running back get into space. Let him make a move on the linebacker, get to the second level, get to the third level, so on and so forth. I think it's funny that Singletary's wearing number 26. But
I know.
There's a lot to look at here. You got Illuminor 72 pushing number 90 past. You've got Thomas doing a good job. I just want to hear your thoughts when this clip finishes, Kyrie. But this is basically the starters, and I believe they're going against the Houston Texans' second team in this clip.
Yeah, no, I mean, I do think that they've got at least some pieces to work with, like you said. And Runyon, he was able to become a starter there in Green Bay, and he was able to be serviceable, and I think, to me, like, that is what's most important about this unit with the Giants. Like, they had offensive lines that were so below average. Now they've got some guys that's like, okay, they may not be superheroes, but they've got a group that they can build around, and they can at least provide some competent play out there. Runyon next to Andrew Thomas as well. So that's one big thing I really like to focus on is, like, okay, who are guys next to, is a guy who is super elite? Is he being held down because he has, a Jag next to him? Or is it like, okay, no, this guy is boosted up because he's got someone who's actually viable next to him? So, I think Runyon, as well as just seeing, how John Michael Schmitz was able to move some guys there as well. And I think that those 3, if those 3 are able to be those, like, major anchors, I think everything else will fall in line from them. And, you talked a little bit about Evan Neal. I know we weren't able to see any clips of him out there, but, as far as, the failed experiment that was with him, just what are your thoughts on what potentially could have been the issue with Neal, and why things just hadn't panned out for him in Gotham?
I mean, if I knew the answer to that question, boy, I would be employed by the NFL teams in some capacity. But I mean, just on the outside looking in, I never really liked him as a prospect because I felt like sometimes these guys that are all 4 or 5 star guys that go to Alabama and they are just superior throughout the whole process. You could talk about J.C. Latham as a similar type of prospect. I don't know. I feel like they peaked too early. I feel like they maybe aren't working as hard as guys who maybe don't have the physical gifts. It's a really tough thing. I mean, I'm not going to say I would refuse a JC Latham if I was a GM or whatever, but I'd rather have a Joe Thomas, if that makes any sense. I'd rather have somebody who had to transform themselves and has to work really hard because it's a tough job and it's painful. These guys have to go through a lot of on a week to week basis, just insane rehab and recovery, and it's a lot of stuff mentally with all the blocking stuff and the hot routes and the audibles and everything. You got to be on your toes. So I don't know if he had other things, maybe that last part where he didn't quite click for him. You know, I've been doing this a while with the teams. I get the sense this Giants offensive line is going to be good enough, and at some point they'll be scapegoated because the quarterback wasn't good enough. But they'll say, "Oh, we can't have Greg Van Roten in there," when really, like, Daniel Jones needs to get rid of the damn ball, you know. And I think that's what's going to end up happening to a good to decent group is going to get scapegoated for, you know, contract reasons or whatever. But I just kind of see it coming. It's unfortunate. This team probably, I mean, they can make me eat my words, but I think they'll be picking in the top 5 or top 10 again next year.
Oh yeah, I don't think that's any a hyperbole at all. You know, I think they're very much devoid of talent, and you know, as far as like it's crazy, honestly, to think that they had the season they did in 2022 because you know, I mean, you have Daniel Jones having 15 touchdown passes, and you know you know, Isaiah Hodgins, who was literally a practice squad player for the Bills for years on end. You know, ended up like emerging late in that season and things like that. So, you know, I think the fact that Brian Daboll was able to get those guys to the playoffs, like it was tremendous. However, I don't think that, like you said, I don't think it's necessarily the offensive line that they need to be worried as much about as much as they need to worry about the quarterback, as much as you know some of the guys on defense that they lost, you know, things like that. So now before we get out of here, we gotta of course, you know, talk a little bit about the team in the nation's capital. Washington Commanders are another group who has you know, made some changes, and again, a unit that really is abysmal in 2020. You know, a group that, you know, really, I know Sam Howell wasn't necessarily making the best decisions when he was letting it fly last season, but part of some of the issues were the fact that the offensive line just really couldn't protect. Didn't really create a lot of lanes for Brian Robinson and the rest of the backfield as well. But you know, as far as like being able to overhaul things, you know, the Commanders are able to bring in Brandon Coleman, the third rounder, playing left tackle. They doubled up on some guys who got away from KC with Nick Allegretti and Andrew Wiley. Allegretti will be playing left guard, and Andrew Wiley will be playing right tackle. Sam Cosmi, who, you know, put out of Texas at right guard, and you know, a divisional swap here with Tyler Guyton coming over from Dallas. You know, so a name that I really like in this group is Andrew Wiley. You know, just from the perspective of, you know, he's a vet. You know, he's a guy who's improved steadily throughout his time, you know, in Kansas City. And you know, for me, when you're able to have at least solid, viable guys at tackle specifically, and you talked about this a little bit last week, that as far as, you know, grading or giving more point value for tackles versus interior linemen. You know, I find a lot of value in bringing in a guy like Andrew Wiley, who is a vet, who has improved, who's played in a lot of meaningful games, you know, having won back-to-back titles with KC. You know, his numbers or his grades have steadily improved over the years. And even with Nick Allegretti, he's not necessarily a world beater, but he's shown that if he's able to, if he is in your lineup, he can be serviceable. Now, one thing that's interesting is that his numbers kind of took a dip when he played more. So we'll see what that means for him as a full-time starter. But yeah, I think this is a group that really is trying to lay a new foundation. I think unlike the Giants, right? Like it's like, okay, what's the difference between our 29th and 30th ranked overall teams? At least the Giants have a true cornerstone at left tackle. A guy that you know what you're going to get from him every single week. Um, the Commanders don't necessarily have that. Let alone do they have, they don't have that bedrock player like that. But they also don't necessarily have the continuity or the consistency as far as some of the guys that are going to be protecting the number 2 overall pick, Jaden Daniels, this season. So just thoughts on this group overall and some names that you think could really be the X factors for this group.
Yeah, I mean, that's a really good intro. I would just say that the one thing the Commanders have that the Giants don't have, and a lot of teams don't have, is they have Cliff Kingsbury, and they have this RPO offense where they are going to be able to employ the system of quick decisions, and that will hopefully cover up for some of the shortcomings. Now, I agree they're 30th overall and they deserve it. And Andrew Wiley is actually kind of like a lightning rod for a lot of criticism among the fan base. I think there's a lot of film out there that proves he's, as you say, a serviceable player. Could you upgrade upon him? Yes, you absolutely could, but he's fine, more or less, and definitely has big game experience and is tough. I think it'll be interesting to see what the coaching staff does with this group of middling players. Tyler Biotish is probably the most talented out of the 5, and also Sam Cosmi at right guard. So because we don't really have a lot of film of the starters in preseason, and also teams are just keeping it so vanilla, so I can't really show you the creative blocking schemes that they're going to employ. I just want to go back and show you some Sam Cosmi clips from 2023 week 10 against the Seattle Seahawks. He is right there in the middle of the screen taking on Leonard Williams in a twist. This is a game where people will remember it went down to the end of the game. It went to be 26. This is the drive that made it 26-26. The Commanders would go on to lose 29-26. But look at Sam Cosmi taking on 2 people. This is 2 plays in a row. I did not edit those together. Those are not a play from the first quarter and a play from the second quarter. This is 2 plays in a row, and I think a 2-minute situation where they're driving, and the defense does the same twist twice, and both times Sam Cosmi ends up with a defender on one in each hand. Stuff like that makes me excited. Stuff like Tyler Guyton burying people makes me happy. If I'm having a bad day, I could just look at stuff like this, and it turns my day around. So I just wanted to go back to show that Sam Cosmi is a pretty decent player, and whatever the Commanders are up to, he'll be a part of it. I think this is a team that won't necessarily crack the top side of the rankings, but depending on what happens, I could see them being some fantasy production in Washington. I could see guys like Luke McCaffrey being valuable in a dynasty format, and I like Jalen Daniels, especially if you need rushing touchdowns. If you're one of those leagues that prioritizes rushing touchdowns, I think you're going to see that type of stuff out of Washington. And that's my spiel on one of the least popular teams in the league. Don't worry, I have an opinion on all of them.
Yeah, that's too funny. Yeah, Sam Cosmi has graded out extremely well through Pro Football Focus, and he's had over 70 overall ratings in each of his 3 seasons in the league, including an 80.6 rating last year in 2023. So, he is a, viable player and is, like you said, probably the best offensive lineman that the Commanders have. And a guy that I think as far as like I said earlier, they don't have a ton of bedrock players, right? But they have a guy like Sam Cosmi who most likely going to be a starter for them for many years, and it's great to know that okay, got a young guy behind this offensive line, got to invest in this group. That's what they've done. They've invested in the group. They didn't take a lot. They weren't able to swing for a lot of home runs, right? But they got some singles and doubles here. I think being able to at least put something serviceable in front of Jaden Daniels is important because one, like you said, Cliff Kingsbury has an offense that's designed to get the ball out of the quarterback's hands and into the hands of some athletes. Two, we are also talking about a Jaden Daniels who rushed for, I believe, 1,100 yards last year in his Heisman Trophy winning season at LSU. So this isn't necessarily, this is no slight to Sam Howell because he is a solid athlete, but Jaden Daniels, aside from Lamar Jackson, aside from Justin Fields, that guy when he takes off and runs out of the pocket, there's not going to be too many quarterbacks in the league that can do what he does in space. So I always find it interesting as far as how an offensive line unit that is more or that is protecting a more mobile quarterback, how they're able to really block for a guy like that. So, and Cliff Kingsbury had experience with that with Kyler Murray in Arizona. So, just what are your thoughts, Matt, as far as an offensive line unit like Washington's that will be protecting a more mobile threat on the center?
It covers up a lot of problems. It's certainly to have a player like that bail you out is huge. And, not only are we excited about the offensive line, but we try to educate people about it. I just included those twist videos as kind of a capper to compare to the Becton twist video. And what if you're a young guy and you're like, what should I do when there's a stunt in front of me and I'm looking? You should always look for work. And if you need to have a guy in each hand, then that's what you do. You know what I mean? And that's the type of savviness that can make the difference between a guy who has a 10-year career and a guy who doesn't. And it's so funny. I've been doing this research for this podcast, and you type in offensive line, and you don't really get much. You get offensive jokes, you get linemen, you get pictures of people who are working on electricity power lines. So it's like some of the stuff that I think myself and other people in the media are familiar with, maybe the casual fan and even the diehard fans aren't familiar with. So I just want to broaden the horizons for people who are interested in football, and every week show a little bit more of each one of these divisions, each one of these conferences, their best offensive lines and the worst offensive lines, and hopefully something good and about the bad ones and something bad about the good ones.
Yeah, no, I think it's such a great point because, even thinking about a team like Baltimore, right, where, obviously Lamar Jackson, having that guy on the center makes your running game that much better, of course. But this has been a team that has, they've just churned out guy after guy after guy, whether it's Marshall Yanda and Jonathan Ogden back in the day to, Ronnie Stanley and oh my goodness, thinking of I know they had Cleveland up front. I know they've had Tyler Linderbaum. So like some of these guys that who either were unknowns or they got to develop. They were backups. Now they're being elevated into starting roles. Like some of these teams do well historically because they invest in the offensive line, whether that's personnel wise, whether that's coaching wise. I'm really interested to see what the Bills do this year, right? Like as far as because they added a guy like Dan Gomez, being able to have a And even like in Tennessee, right? I'm excited to see what Tennessee does this year because they have Bill Callahan, who is regarded by many as one of the best offensive line coaches to ever do it. So it's things like that that help separate teams. It was always tough to see a team like, let's say, like Kansas City a couple years ago when they played Tampa in the Super Bowl, right? To see a team be so strong, to have every piece, and have some guys defensively as well. But then one thing holding them back was that offensive line, and even having the best player on planet Earth, right? It didn't even matter because the guys up front couldn't do it, right? And so I think like it really just goes to show you need those guys up front in the trenches to really be able to be not only as productive as possible to really maximize your potential as an offensive unit, So, but who am I? Just a former
I'm
offensive
hearing a
lineman.
lot. I'm hearing a lot of stuff here. I'm hearing that maybe next episode is going to be the AFC North. Maybe we talk about Baltimore Ravens and the Cleveland Browns and some of the other heavy hitters on the offensive line rankings. And I will say this, though. Joe Delisandris, he's the longtime offensive line coach in Baltimore, recently stepped away from the team for a medical issue. We just wanted to say, get well, Joe. Uh, you're one of the best. George Warhop has stepped in, so it seems to be a pretty serious issue. They've replaced the all-line coach, and that makes a difference when you're trying to climb out of changing three guys, left guard, right guard, and right tackle. Is Patrick McCary going to be the right tackle? Is it going to be Roger Rosengarten? I never promised you a Rosengarten out of Washington. I mean, there's a lot to talk about there. We could talk about Baltimore for an hour, but we are getting to the end of this hour. We went through the NFC East pretty cleanly. Kyrie, any thoughts? Any final thoughts before we sign off for the evening?
Yeah, I think NFC East is very intriguing division overall, and I think each one of these teams is almost like a microcosm of of their offensive lines, right? Like I think each team, to me, really like the offensive lines are going to play such a major part in how each of these teams finishes. I do think Philly is an elite team, and I think it's mainly because of their offensive line. A lot of it is because of their offensive line. They put out a ton of weapons and things like that. But that offensive line is where their bread and butter is made. Dallas, I really think, it's going to take a step back this year. But, I think just knowing that they've got some pieces in the trenches there that they, whether it's Guyton or having a Hall of Fame like guard in that point, right? I think being able to have some of the pieces, it's going to be able to put them in games and should elevate the run game probably above its potential because Rico Dowd, particularly those guys, I don't know if they're game changers, but they're guys that are following behind the offensive line unit that is confident. And then rounding things out with that with Washington and Giants, I think those groups, again, are improving, and they have some things, but it's going to be interesting to see how they build things out because they're not at where they, I'm sure, want to be fully, but they have some nice places to start building up that foundation. So we'll see how that leads things out in 2024.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know that it makes a difference in winning your fantasy league or winning that against the spread bet, but I think knowing these things can help you become a more educated football fan, and it can't hurt. It can't hurt to know these things, especially as the season goes on and the weather changes. As you say, the Super Bowl, man, we could do an hour on the Super Bowl and how they don't really call holding in those types of big games, and how the turf is of various qualities, and if it's a bad field, then the pass rushers can't get purchased. So it's like offensive line has advantage in those situations. Seems like everything is slated for the line to become more important as you get closer to your fantasy playoffs. As you get down to week 14 and 15, it's big money making against the spread over under weeks. That's when you really want to know about the O-line. So, and when the weather's warm, it's maybe not quite as important, but something for the diehards to watch. And I think that's about it for us. I'm Matt Batanti, and on Football Guys, you can check. I've got some new articles coming out: most overrated lines, most underrated lines, best pass blocking, worst pass blocking, all sorts of stuff coming out in the next week or two. Kyrie, anything you want to promote before we sign off?
Stay tuned. I am working on I'm potentially working on some things behind the scenes here with some things for the regular season with the NFL. So I'll keep you guys posted on that. But just in the meantime, just stay posted on my Twitter and Instagram and as well as TikTok, @3_Demos. I'll be sharing some clips from the episodes as we get going along here. So just be on the lookout. But some things coming down the pipeline that I will share with you guys in the near future. So stay tuned.
All right, guys, we're out of here.
Adios.